All right, I think we're going to get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Larry Holdren. I am the president of Holdren Strategic Communications based in Denver, Colorado. And I also run a nonprofit. It's called the Colorado Energy and Water Institute. That is a small nonprofit that's about 3 years old. So I'm excited to communicate with all of you today, along with my colleagues, Elise Bishop and Kate Peters, about what is certainly the most trying time to communicate in my lifetime, and probably for most of us on the phone as well. A little bit more about me. I've been practicing public relations and communications work mainly in Colorado my entire career for 25 years now. I was a journalist for a brief period of time, and then decided that that wasn't for me, and kind of switched to the other side of the coin. And so I've really specialized the last several years in crisis communications. And so I'm excited to have a conversation with you all today. Before we really jump in, I want to quickly just say we want to hear from you. So please ask your questions along the way. There's a question and answer function, and we will try to get to as many questions as we can throughout this. We've actually gotten a couple of questions already from participants who emailed to us, so we'll address those throughout as well, and thank you for those. But please don't hesitate to ask questions that you might have, and we'll do our best to get to those throughout the presentation. So I'm going to let Kate introduce herself, and then Elise, and then we'll jump into the presentation. Kate?
Thanks, Larry. Hi, everyone, and I echo what Larry said. Thank you for joining us today. We're grateful for the opportunity to be able to speak to all of you, and I hope that we can offer some tips and answer some questions that can be helpful to you. I am primarily someone with an agency background, so I've worked in communications in a lot of different industries. These days, I'm actually a freelance independent contractor, and I do a lot of nonprofit consulting. So you'll hear from me later about some specifics in regards to donor relations, but I hope I can, again, be helpful to you. I know we're covering a lot of different industries just based on who registered for this call today, but please reach out. We're here to help any way we can, whether it's during this webinar or after the fact. So thanks for having me. Over to you, Elise.
Awesome, thanks. So my name is Elise Bishop. I am the founder of Bishop Media Strategies, which is based in Denver, Colorado. My background has really included positions on both the corporate and agency sides, which kind of has given me a unique perspective. I've offered strategic planning support for everything from B2C brands like in the beauty and fashion world to more CPG focused brands in food and beverage to nonprofits, and offering support both from an external communications perspective to C-suite executives for internal communications, and really just also providing crisis communication support. I think just to kind of echo what Larry had shared, this time especially has been a real interesting and convoluted time from a communications perspective, and I think we're all just wanting to offer as much support as we can from a communications and messaging perspective to your businesses and nonprofits in the community.
Great, thank you both. It really is my honor to be on this call with both Elise and Kate. Kate and I have worked together off and on for, the last 10 or 15 years, not to date us both, and Elise and I had the pleasure of working together last year on a big project. And so we all have very different kinds of experience that hopefully we'll be able to answer your questions and impart some information that you'll find valuable today. So what we'll cover today, I'm going to go through a few just guiding principles of crisis communications in general, but also of just communicating during this crazy time that we're in right now. Obviously, this is unprecedented. And that despite the amount of preparation that I certainly have done a lot of preparation with my clients over the last several years, there's nothing that prepared any of them for something quite of this magnitude. And if somebody's out there that claims that they've prepared for this kind of thing, I'd love to talk to them and get their perspective, because this is certainly not something that a lot of us ever really prepare for. Prepare for kind of isolated crisis situations, but nothing that is this widespread. Then Kate's going to take us through some thoughts about and best practices around communicating with donors. Certainly a sensitive time right now to be asking people for money. And there are some things that we want you to think about if you are needing to do that. We'll talk about some case studies. There's some there's some great examples out there of organizations that are really doing a great job of communicating right now. We want to share some of those with you. There are plenty of examples that I'm sure we're all aware of organizations that are doing a pretty poor job. I didn't know how many businesses I had done business with online until this whole thing started, and I got an email from, I think, every single one of them, including little coffee shops and airports that apparently I bought a latte from at one point. Next, we'll cover off on some just helpful resources, things that we found over the course of the last month or so in our work that we think may be helpful to you. One caveat there is some of these are financial in nature. I am certainly not a CPA. Kate and Elise aren't either, but there are some financial resources that hopefully you're all aware of right now, but we want to convey some of those to you as well. But if you want specific financial advice, we're certainly not your experts. And as I mentioned, please feel free to ask questions as we go. We want to make this as useful and beneficial to you as possible. So if you have questions about something that we said that spurs a question, please don't hesitate to ask through the question and answer function, and we'll do our best to get to it. So.
And I also just wanted to add, Larry, that we will be sharing this out afterwards. So if there's anything that anyone wasn't able to catch during this time or wanted to go back and find, we're happy to share the presentation. And we also have a messaging kind of toolkit that can walk you through how to think about communication for your organization, knowing that, you know, everybody does have their specific needs. And so while we're hoping to cover that during this, we of course understand that there's some things that we might not be able to. And so we did just kind of want to reiterate that we're here to support and help however we can, and we'll share that out afterwards.
Yes, thanks, Elise. All right, just a few things for you to think of kind of up front that we put together. One is this is hard, you know, and frankly, I'll go as far as to say this sucks, and it's hard to communicate in this kind of environment and to know what to do. And so, you know, to me, the sooner that I've gotten for my own business and my own businesses, the sooner that I've sort of accepted the fact that this is a really hard time and that there are challenges here that are pretty unprecedented. It's just been a lot easier for me to think forward and to think about how the businesses that I represent are going to exist not only in this world but after this is over. In whatever phased way that looks. So, you know, I think accepting that mentally that this is hard. Secondly, I think it's really important that we all think about taking care of our people first. I've heard of and been part of so many examples with organizations that I work with where we've participated in Zoom calls or conference calls where they're really just a catharsis. You know, it's an hour-long therapy session, which people really need right now. We're all very isolated. And taking care of your people, certainly your employees. I mean, one of the things that in a lot of crisis situations I've dealt with over the course of my career, a lot of times in companies and organizations forget about their employees, and that's really your most important audience. And it's certainly your most important audience in this situation. So make sure you're taking care of your people. Stay in your lane. This is not the time to become a health expert. There's certainly a lot of information out there around this issue. And if you are a health related organization, and if you're not a health related organization, even more importantly, it's essential to ensure that the information that you share about anything health related, particularly COVID-19, comes from credible sources like the CDC. So just make sure that, you know, this isn't the time to feel like you have to share your take on the issue. It's not appropriate. In fact, I think can do damage. One size doesn't fit all. This is the case with any crisis, but certainly in this situation, your stakeholders, and Kate will talk about this later, all have different needs of you right now. Donors need something very different than the communities you serve, than your employees need. And it's important to think about what they need from you and customize your communications appropriately for that audience. Any kind of critical or any kind of pre-scheduled communication that you may have, it's really important to take a serious look at that. And hopefully you're doing that already a month into this. But, you know, just because you had mapped out 2 months worth of your social media editorial calendar, hopefully doesn't mean that you're sticking to that verbatim. This is a different time and requires a different kind of tone. So make sure that your tone is appropriate, which I'm skipping ahead there, but your tone has to be appropriate and you have to be flexible. And it's really important that you are able to kind of flex to adjust to the situation. You know, one of the interesting examples that I just came across this week was the Dumb Friends League here in town. They do a furry scurry every year, which is a great event, and they've taken that event as a virtual dog walk, basically, which I'll be interested to see how that does. But I applaud their effort to really be flexible and figure out a way to try to connect with their audiences. I believe it's their biggest fundraiser of the year, and so I thought that was a really interesting example of a way that you can be flexible, still provide something that people really need right now, and still try to raise a little money along the way. Honesty and transparency are always important. They are essential right now. You know, I firmly believe that this period in time is going to make or break a lot of organizations, but by the way that they handle it. And organizations that are trying to be opportunistic right now are going to lose. And so it's really important that you're honest and transparent, and transparent about the fact that if you have a challenge, if you really need to raise money in order to survive, it's important that you share that with your donors or with your members, because you know they'll want to know. They may not be able to do anything. It's a tough time for everybody, but it's important that you're honest and transparent about where you are as an organization and what you need. And finally, this is really important and really leads into the next part of the presentation that Elise will guide us through. But ask yourself this question: will this communication be helpful? Will it be helpful to my community? Will it be helpful to my employees? Is it going to help in the current situation and help people deal with it? And if the answer is yes, then you should probably send it. If the answer is nah, maybe not, then it's probably a question that you should ask yourself of whether or not you should be sending that communication in the first place. So ask yourself that upfront question and let that be your guide. Elise?
Yeah, I actually think Kate is going to take this one, Larry. There was you before that. Yep.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Did you want to do the 4 questions now, Elise, or do you want me to come back to that?
I can go over that. Yep, I can go over that now, and then we'll go back a few slides.
Okay, perfect.
So as you'll hear, Kate's going to kind of outline some guiding principles in terms of just overall communicating during COVID-19, especially when it comes to donor relations. But I also wanted to kind of offer this as a helpful test for organizations to identify when it makes most sense to communicate with an audience. And this is just a really simple way to kind of ask those questions to start understanding when it really does make most sense to communicate or not. So the first question, of course, is, will those who matter to us expect something? If the answer is yes, then we recommend responding. And again, I think everything that kind of Larry highlighted in terms of honesty and transparency and flexibility should definitely be a part of that communication. If the answer is no, then you would go to question number 2, which is, will silence be seen as an indifference? You know, a lot of times there's organizations that maybe aren't comfortable saying anything, but if they don't, it could be viewed from their audience as being indifferent to the situation, which of course, during a situation like this is the last thing that you would want to be communicated. So if the answer is yes to that, then respond now. If it's not, then you know, you can move on to this question number 3, which is a really important question, especially with regards to just overall messaging for your organization. And that's, are others speaking about us and shaping the conversation and perception? As Larry mentioned, there's a lot of information out there. Some is accurate, some isn't. But from your organization's communication efforts, it's imperative that any messaging that is out there about your communication is communication that you have delivered to your audience. So if there are others that are speaking about your organization or potentially shaping what that perception might be, it would make sense to have communication to ensure that they are hearing directly from you and ensuring that all the information that you are sharing is accurate. So if the answer to that question is yes, then you would respond then. And if not, you would go to this last question, which is, if we wait, will we lose the ability to influence the outcome? If the answer to that is yes, then it's important to respond then. If it's not, it's still important to think through these questions and prepare for those potential yes questions. So if you're in a position where, you know what, we're going to sit tight and not communicate or deliver any messaging to our audience, but in the interim period, we can develop some messaging so that if issues or topics come up, we'll be ready and prepared to communicate with the audience in a timely manner. So hopefully, you know, this is just something, again, that I think can be really helpful and useful to think through from an audience perspective to ensure that you're communicating the most effectively and in the most timely manner possible. Do you want to hop back up? Yeah, there we go.
Awesome. Thanks, Elise. So a couple things in regards to donor relations that I wanted to walk through, and this is Kate. I like to start when people ask, should I be sending a communicating, how should I be communicating right now, is to ask yourself whether or not you offer an essential service. That may seem kind of basic and obvious, but there's a few different, categories that nonprofits can fall into right now. One being, the traditional, always essential service, like a food bank, for example. You're going to continue to be having a need it's very great, even greater right now. And there's obviously a clear path of communication around a time of crisis for that. You might be a type of organization that partially offers an essential service, or maybe you've shifted to be able to do that. Or you may be one that doesn't. And we're not necessarily saying that if you don't offer an essential service that you should just go completely dark right now as an organization. But what we are saying is that you're going to have to be really thoughtful in how you communicate with your donors. So we'll come back to that. The next thing you need to ask is, what is my most immediate need right now? So the way that you ask for funding and speak with your donors is likely very different than it normally might be. So it's going to be really critical to say, not just we need money, because that's all of our most immediate need as nonprofits all the time, but to really try to think about what you can accomplish right now and what you're going to need to make that happen. So if you can communicate your path of support really clearly, your donor base is going to support that. Also ask yourself, who are my key stakeholders? Segmenting your audience and communicating to people differently is something that I imagine you're all used to doing all the time in your everyday communications. But I would take an even deeper dive right now and really think about who those segments are. For example, a longtime loyal annual supporter that's been with your organization for a long time and knows you very well. Communicating to them is going to look a lot differently than someone that may be new to your organization or has just started giving in the past weeks or months. So make sure that you're really segmenting that audience and looking at all those different audiences before you send a communication. And then think about not just your donors. Obviously, that feels like maybe the most important audience right now because funding is so critical. But think about people who can support you in other ways. Are there volunteers you can mobilize right now that are stuck at home but have free time to make phone calls? Are there other people in the community, partner organizations that you could team up with? So make sure that you're looking at ways of support through various avenues and putting all those people in your key stakeholder list. And then ask yourself, how can we offer value to the community at this time? So again, that might look the same as it always does if you're offering an essential service that remains critical or even more critical. But maybe there's ways you can adjust your operations and be flexible, to Larry's earlier points. And mobilize yourselves to offer some support in a way that you wouldn't normally, but that's needed at this time. One example I like to give there is Lyft, the ride sharing company. I know they're not a nonprofit, but they obviously have taken a huge hit. People are staying home. They're just not traveling around as much right now. And so I don't have their numbers in front of me, but I imagine they've taken a pretty significant hit in terms of the amount of business the company is receiving. But from the get-go, when all of the stay-at-home orders first started and all of this started to unravel, they quickly mobilized to put a lot of information out on their site about how they were getting their employees, A, back on the road to keep paying them, but B, doing rides that helped support the crisis. So delivering samples, picking up supplies, getting food to people who couldn't go to the store themselves. They came up with a really solid plan for how to mobilize their people, and they used their drivers to help with the crisis. So great way to give back to the community and be relevant and helpful and offer value at this time. And then specifically for tips for raising funds, Larry already talked to being flexible. We've mentioned that a couple of times, but things continue to change rapidly. I imagine that it looks different from 2 weeks ago or 1 week ago, even to today. We're all trying to manage how long we're going to be in the situation, what it's going to look like when we are allowed to leave home, what it's going to look like days, weeks, months from now. So just make sure that you and your team are flexible and communicating with each other. Larry talked earlier about the importance of checking in during this time of isolation. It's good to check in and make sure everyone's staying safe and gets that point of connection, but also that you remain open to approaching projects in a different way. There's lots of different options for how you can mobilize your team and redirect resources, and that might have to happen several times before this is all over, unfortunately. So that flexibility is really going to serve you. Make sure that you are communicating with your donors. Overwhelmingly, most people's questions to me, at least, and Larry and Elise, you can speak to what you've heard, are just a complete fear and paralysis over asking for money. People are like, I need money. Our organization has to have it, but I just don't know how to go about asking. I don't know how to talk to my donors. I'm scared. What do I do? And again, we're not saying that you go business as usual and just start spamming your donor base, begging for money, as important as it might be for you to get it. But let donors know what your organization is up to, even if it looks very different from the norm. Be really clear and transparent with them. Another point Larry made earlier. I saw in the news this week here in Denver, there's an organization called Freedom Service Dogs for America, and they train service animals specifically for veterans who have PTSD or other special needs that require the help of a service animal. And so they just came out very clearly and said, our business looks different right now. We're not able to train and place dogs at the same level that we were for many reasons, but the main donor who fed all of the animals under our care had to pull back their funding because of COVID-19. They're not able to provide that support. So we need food for our dogs. We need help feeding them. This is how much we need. This is how much we have left to feed them. This is what our need is. They were very specific, and they just came out and asked for it. And people, gave what they could to support that. So it was a matter of communicating clearly and honestly and directly. Make sure you're communicating health and safety first and ask for money second. If you're going to come out with a donor communication, it's really important that you've been planting the seeds and building that foundation first. So your donor community is going to want to know, how is your operations changed right now? What does that look like? How are you making sure that you're keeping your employees, the people you serve, other people involved in your operation safe? Make sure that you're communicating that health and safety first before you go and make that ask. And then be honest and manage expectations. Fundraising is likely going to be down quite significantly in 2020 and perhaps beyond. I want to reiterate what Larry said earlier from the get-go and just sympathize with that. Like he said, that this sucks. This is just hard right now. And we all feel that. And I think nonprofits especially. But it's really important to manage these expectations with your boss, with your board, with anyone that really needs to hear that communication. Try to be creative and think of new ways you could increase your revenue or decrease your expenses right now, but also make sure that you're not waiting to drop that bomb months down the road. To the degree that you can, be transparent as you go, and that will land a lot better and be much more well received if you have that open and honest communication along the way. Concentrate on renewing your current donors. Again, we talked about how a loyal, longtime donor and a new one look very different. It's going to be really hard to get new donors on board right now when the economy is unstable and so many things are unknown. But if you concentrate on renewing your existing donors first, starting with your most loyal ones, that's going to be your low-hanging fruit. Leverage partnerships. Think through your network of support and ask yourself, are there corporate sponsors or other relationships that we could be leveraging right now? I know I've seen hundreds of examples of generosity right now in the corporate world. A lot of companies and high net worth individuals are coming forward, offering their support, contributing to or running campaigns. For those that are able to, that's certainly happening right now. And if those people are already part of your partnership with your organization, don't be afraid to make that ask. Get creative, get them involved. We've seen a lot of examples of corporations teaming up with nonprofits right now to do some really powerful things. And then maintain your relationships. Think about other ways you can get the word out about your critical needs. One just quick one is to contact local media. There's been a lot of news articles coming out with lists of ways to help while you're stuck at home, things you can be doing to support your community. If you have ways to do that, get that out there. Those media partners are updating those articles, putting out new ones. A lot of people are getting really creative with mobilizing support from home right now. And if you have a way for people to be helping you, make sure you get that out there.
All right, actually, we have a question. Kai Englert, who is on, and a little background about Kai. You didn't know I was going to say this about him, but I've known him for his entire life, I should say. I think his sister and I went to school together from kindergarten through college, believe it or not. So thanks for joining. I'm pleased that you're on. And Kai runs a healthcare provider agency that staffs rural hospitals, primarily in Kansas. Their main sales technique so far has just been dropping in on hospitals and getting face-to-face meetings. And obviously, it's a lot more difficult these days, given a lot of the restrictions and the fact that a lot of those hospitals a lot of rural hospitals in particular, are struggling to survive right now. They have been for a while, but this situation certainly doesn't help. And so his question is, really a couple of questions here, and Kai will respond separately to your email with some thoughts on the larger question. But the more pointed question with respect to this webinar is, how do they market at this time? When you're used to just dropping by and selling services, what's an approach that you should take? And I think one of your inclinations in your email to us was, maybe you just sort of wait a few weeks or a month or so and see how things sort of shake out in a lot of your target areas. I think that's an approach. But as Kate and Elise and I were talking, I think Kate had a really interesting concept for you that I'd like to ask her to share. So Kate, go ahead.
Sure, and this actually also relates back to a donor point that I skipped over, so this was good timing. So one idea I had, and it goes back to that point of how you can offer value to the community right now that you're serving, is could you, and of course this depends on what funds you have available right now to do this, but could you select a few of those key hospitals or clinics that you're serving and drop off a meal for the healthcare workers, and just, first acknowledge and thank the frontline heroes right now and all the work that they're doing, and then put a handwritten note, a personal appeal to that administrative person, the decision maker in that hospital, to say, hey, we're here to fill those holes. We're here to help with that critical need. Put your contact information in there and leave that there with them. I know that depending on the organization being able to receive that meal, you may have to get through a couple of, red tape hurdles to be able to do that drop off safely. But think about that value. And then it leads to another point, and this relates to donor communications too. Right now, going back to some of the basics of communication, I think is a smart move. And by that, I mean, don't just rely on email and digital communications. Pick up the phone if you have contacts that you can call one-on-one, or better yet, send a snail mail communication, a handwritten note. Those things, especially when people are in isolation, that could make someone's week or someone's day if they haven't interacted with anyone in person in a while. So think about going back to the basics, whether as a marketing tool in this case, or with communication to donors, and pick up a pen and paper or pick up the phone, and don't just rely on that email communication.
Yep, and just to build on what Kate was sharing in terms of that idea of sending either a meal or some type of item to those in your network, the great part about that is that you can also support the community in doing so. So, when you are sending those meals, you can work with a local restaurant that needs that business. And that's another way that you can just support the community. So it's not necessarily just about trying to reach that person, but it also shows that you're also involved in the community and giving back in that regard, which is great as well. So the next thing here are additional ideas for reaching your audience. In addition to kind of sharing some of those best practices, we also kind of wanted to highlight concrete ideas like that for reaching your audience. Some of that will include, developing a care and concern committee for those that need support and who might have pressing needs, whether it's childcare, delivering grocery cards, or even for some neighbors, that might not be able to get out of the house going grocery shopping. I think this is something that we've continued to see an increase of just in our communities from a personal perspective, but there's certainly a lot that organizations can do to offer support. And so one idea for that is really kind of to develop that care and concern committee and offer support for those who might have needs within your organization, or even for those that are outside of your organization that you can also potentially support. So that's one great idea. Another one is working with leaders of your organization to create communications that can be delivered, whether it's digitally or print. As Kate shared before, you know, the snail mail idea is definitely great, especially if it's a postcard or something that's simple and won't really get lost. But I think also the handwritten note will go a long ways.
And Elise, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can I just chime in? Because we had a question related to that.
Sure.
We had a follow-up question in regard to snail mail, which was, will donors be concerned about our safety practices? For example, going to the post office or touching the envelopes. Elise, do you want to address that, or I'm happy to as well?
Yeah, sure. You know, I think from a snail mail perspective, I personally haven't had a lot of communication around the concern of using either, you know, snail mail like UPS or FedEx to send deliveries. I think that it's also important potentially to kind of share information of how they might, you know, be able to disinfect that, or in some way, if you're able to kind of share it in a way that can not necessarily seem like their safety is being breached. But again, I haven't had any concerns over the snail mail with both nonprofits that we've worked with and also from donors that have received it.
Yeah, and to just add to that, Elise, if that is something that you're worried your constituents will be concerned about, you could get creative, either maybe directly on the envelope on the back. You could have something like, this piece of mail was assembled with precautions taken around COVID-19. Please see inside for more details. And you could actually address that, you know, like, no one licked this envelope, we wore gloves. You know, you could put in, I know the post office has some specific language on their site about things you can do to keep yourself safe when you check your mail, you know, not approaching a post office worker too closely when they're dropping it off. You can leave it, you know, in your garage or somewhere, you know, for a few days if you want to be extra cautious. So you can certainly refer to some of those best practices for mail safety, and you can address those either on the envelope, or you could put something on your website or in a digital communication that just says, we're conducting, you know, mailing at this time, and here's what we're doing to make sure we're keeping you and our employees safe.
Awesome. So in addition to kind of sending information like that, the other thought is doing a fireside style communication. So that's more of a digital communication or an Instagram live message to share with your audience, whether that's just from an overall, you know, checking in, just wanting to ensure that the community and that your audience knows that you're there, or, you know, if it's from one of your leaders sharing how the organization is doing and potentially offering other ideas for getting involved in the community. So that kind of encompasses several different examples of how the leaders of your organization can also get involved and be a part of the communication that you're sharing with your audience. In addition to that—
Hey, Elise, it's Larry real quick. We had and Laura Wegg said, I see your question, and we'll get to that after Elise's section, but Kelsey Bunker who's on the call said she had stickers made that said, I didn't lick this, to seal the envelopes, and that it's been very well received. I love that idea.
That's awesome, Kelsey.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, we still have to have a little fun even now. So great idea. Go ahead, Elise.
Yeah, that's great. So other areas are, you know, creating community through offering members, you know, to send those handwritten notes. It doesn't necessarily have to come directly from your team. It can come from donors or staff, or even through social media. Highlighting team members or donors, whether it's a day of the week or, you know, whether it's monthly. I think just highlighting someone that went above and beyond, whether it's in your organization or outside of your organization. I think that's one thing that we've especially continued to see from a media perspective, is people are really wanting to hear the positive stories. People are wanting to hear the examples of how the community is coming together and how, you know, different nonprofits and organizations are collaborating so that they are able to communicate more effectively. And I think highlighting them in a positive way is a great way to do that, which kind of gets to the final point on here, which is just aggregating the good news, whether that's stories of families, other topics in the community that are worth sharing, and offering a smile a day to your community and to your audience to ensure that they know that you're still there and that you're there to be hopeful and positive through a really difficult time.
All right, I'm going to go to another question that we had. The question is, I work with a nonprofit with a mission that has great relevance for business recovery, struggling with how to sensitively engage our stakeholders around what they can be doing now to put themselves on a path to recovery while they are so immersed in a crisis here and now. Any thoughts on that? It's a good question. I'm going to let Elise and Kate take first crack at that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think this goes back to the point that we were talking about just in terms of overall preparation. What we've kind of continued to see was in those first few weeks when this COVID pandemic really came up, there was a lot of just scrambling around how to communicate when we're much more in crisis mode. And now that the rhetoric and the conversation around this is starting to lean more towards, well, what happens next? What happens as things start to reopen? And that's a great place to start leaning in on and to start to prepare for. So one thing that we'll share after this is a nonprofit communication strategy that really outlines some of those key areas in terms of the messaging that you'll want to get out to your audience, who the key audience is, and the best way to communicate with them. So Laura, we'll be sure to ensure you get that, but definitely now is a great time to start thinking ahead in terms of preparing for the communication once things do start to reopen, in terms of how you want to best message to your audience, along with the ways that you're doing that. So whether that's, again, through social media, through videos, whether it's email or snail mail, now is a great time to start thinking through what those opportunities look like.
Well, and I think, Laura, what's interesting now is you're starting to see more news about the plans that respective governments are starting to talk about with respect to reopening the country, right? And so I think when there's that kind of media coverage, that may be an angle for you to start that conversation where it's, you know, look, right now we're still in Colorado, at least based on the current stay-at-home order, are still a couple of weeks out, but you know, there's still that's a couple of weeks out, which right now, as I'm sitting in my basement office, seems like forever, but it's really not that long. And I think when you're able to kind of use some news articles possibly as a way to connect that to folks, that may be an opportunity to have that conversation. But it's a tough challenge because, to your point, we're so embroiled in the current situation as organizations, and it's sometimes is hard to look ahead. But that's a suggestion. Kate, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, just I applaud you, Laura, for asking, you know, how do I sensitively engage right now, because it feels like such a fine line. You don't want to appear tone deaf and just disregard that we're in a crisis or disregard the immediate fears and concerns. But I don't think this can be, you know, stated enough that people want to feel hopeful. They want a message of hope right now and looking to the future, and like they need a little bit of a like, hey, we're going to get through this together sort of communication. And because you're in the business of business recovery, if there's a value you can offer right now to people, maybe a piece of your offering that normally comes at a cost, you could do a free webinar around a certain topic. I'll use an example in my own personal life. I've been looking into some of the different small business loan forgiveness programs. And I, frankly, as Larry mentioned at the top of this call, we are not financial experts, neither of us, and I'm probably the least so. And so I've been confused with how to navigate that. And I've reached out to a local small business organization here in my county, and they've waived membership for the next 6 months and are just saying, we want to help get businesses back up and running, and here's the ways we're going to do that. We're not going to charge you. Here's what we're offering as a free resource. You can get on the phone with our financial advisor, which I'm myself doing this afternoon. So again, I don't know how much of that flexibility you're able to have in terms of what you can offer, but if there's something of value that you can throw out there, even just a free webinar or setting people up for a meeting to discuss options, I think that that's so valued and appreciated by people right now.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And Laura did mention too that they're thinking about something simple, like here are 3 things you can do right now, which I think I love that. You know, anything that doesn't have to take a lot of time or brain power right now, I think is good. You know, just very simple things that people can act on. We had one more question here, and then we'll move on. I work in underwriting here at KRCC, Southern Colorado's NPR station, which is a nonprofit. Even though underwriting supports our public radio station, I'm still in sales. We have all been walking that fine line between prospecting for corporate support radio announcements from businesses this time, or just leaving it alone altogether. Renewals are also down. What's your suggestion? I consider public radio essential and a vital community service. I do as well, Leslie. That's a good question. Kate, Elise, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, first of all, I'm a huge NPR fan. Thank you for the important work you do. And I think that underwriting for public radio feels, at least to me, different from like a standard sales advertising role right now, because I do think you offer a vital and essential role, as you mentioned in your question. So I think that you're able to cross that line, for lack of a better word, a little further than maybe some other of your sales counterparts can. And again, I would point to maybe what some of the companies are doing to help with this crisis right now. There may be an opportunity for you to get creative in the sales packages you're offering. And I'm just going to completely make this up. I don't know if this is something that's possible, but for some of those renewals, could you say, hey, I know you'll probably need to delay your renewal. We want to offer you this short-term package of underwriting spots where you can talk about a program that you're doing right now to, help raise funds for food banks. And then we would love to welcome you back on as a partner in a few months' time once things get back to normal. Or could you use, maybe make it clear that you're donating some of your underwriting space right now to talk about some of the essential services that are in the community, and sort of do some own goodwill for yourself, and communicate that to your underwriting funding base. Again, just kind of like rallying that support with people that would normally buy space with you, with the hope that that will bring loyalty back to you at a later date. Those are just a couple of ideas. Elise, do you have anything you would add to that?
I also think, Leslie, that it's easy to certainly think about, oh, well, maybe right now we'll just leave this alone. But even though this has really kind of thrown a loop for most businesses and organizations, not only in the US, but globally, there still needs to be business as usual in some cases. And this, I think, is one of those situations where, you're still having to do your job. And I think that being open and transparent about that from the get-go can also go a long way. And so I know that's something that we kind of shared in the beginning, but really just kind of highlighting, I still consider public radio to be essential, and this is vital in our community, and we still absolutely need this part of our business. I think that can also just go a long way, having that transparent conversation with the people that you're working with. So I think kind of utilizing some different tactics in terms of what Kate was sharing from just an overall messaging standpoint and how you're reaching them, but then also really approaching it with vulnerability and approaching it in a way that shows you want to be honest and transparent, and you also need to get your job done, which is the situation for millions of people around, not only the country, but the world as well. So hopefully that helps.
All right, great. Let's move on. We want to share with you now a few case studies that we've come across. Certainly there are more, and And if you all have some, we'd love to see those as well. I'm a junkie for these sorts of things, especially in times like these. But just want to share with you a few that we've come across we think are particularly good.
Yeah, so this is Elise, and one of the things I wanted to chat through was collaborations and partnerships. This is definitely something that we've seen an increase of over the past few months with organizations, both that are nonprofit and both in the consumer-facing side. The example that I put here was from a company called Headspace, which offers kind of meditation services, and they have many partnerships both in the philanthropic world and also in the consumer world. The example I put here was Vitality and Headspace coming together really to kind of help Vitality members with meditation overall, and mental health continues to be something that we hear about, especially around this pandemic. And so this was just a great example of how one organization is partnering with another organization to ensure that both of their audience have tools and resources that they can use. So I've included some considerations here on the right for different suggestions that you can kind of think through potentially going into some of these partnerships. The first one is, can both organizations offer a service that each audience needs? I think that part is especially important, especially as you're thinking through cross-promotional opportunities, whether it's both nonprofits or different organizations that can offer a service to your key audience, but also vice versa. Number 2 on here is there an opportunity to cross-promote your social channels and messages? I think that's one thing that we're really continuing to see an increase around is just Facebook and Instagram alone. The usage of that has gone up, I think it's 47% since this COVID pandemic started. So that just shows you how many people are on their social channels, but it really also offers that cross-promotional opportunity to reach both of your audiences when doing a collaboration like this. Whether it's an Instagram live and you're both going on there to talk about your goals and what you are hopeful for in the future with your organizations, or potentially just doing a Q&A that both of your audiences can get something out of. I'll share some more examples around kind of social media after we get through these. But the other thing is just, do you have a common interest, or do you need something during this time? Are you both working towards a donation goal, or do you both have a specific need that needs to happen immediately? And that can also just be a great way to kind of think through those cross-promotional opportunities, whether it's including something on your landing page or simply just doing a social media campaign. There's a lot of opportunity for bringing together different organizations and partnering to ensure that you're reaching your goals from that communications perspective. So this is another example of just some great communication that we've seen come out over the past few weeks. This is from B Corp. And one of the reasons that we especially liked this example was in terms of how they are developing their community to ensure that the community has a place to share things with each other and with themselves. And that's kind of what you've seen on here. It says here on the Beehive. And that's an area that people can go and they can share, different services that might be helpful resources for other business leaders or other organizations, whether it's crisis management or IT consulting, health policy expertise. Those are things that a lot of businesses are having to think through right now, and that's one way of sharing it, but also getting more detailed into work leave policies and how you've had support with other organizations that has worked really well. So this was just an example of a company and an organization that we've seen really put a resource together that not only was relatively easy and quick to do, but it also encouraged community engagement and encouraged involvement from the community so that they could share what they're learning, but also hear from other people in that audience and hear about other resources that they're using.
And this is Kate. This is one other just quick example I wanted to throw out to you. This is Special Olympics Colorado, which is an organization that I'm really passionate about. They do great work. And what I like about their website right now is that obviously they laddered up to communicating their most important information first, which is how their operations have changed. So they've unfortunately had to cancel all training, competitions, and upcoming events pretty much through the summer at this point. So they have that very clear and in your face when you first visit. But then in addition to that, they have what they're calling their resource hub with all these additional resources that people in their community can click on. And what I really like about this is if you think about a Special Olympics Colorado athlete and its family, and also the people who support those athletes, being out of competition right now for them is devastating. They, the isolation and the loss that we're all feeling can be really scary and difficult for a special needs family for so many different reasons. And so they've got fitness videos and ways to stay active on here. What I really love is this resources for families. They're not just thinking about the athlete, but imagine being a parent who's home with a special needs child right now who is off of their schedule, can't attend therapy, doesn't have access to a lot of the resources that they need to function. They've really thought through all of those things and tried to offer some helpful resources. So just another great example of thinking about their community and also showcasing that they are so much more than just a sports league. This organization on a regular basis offers so much support to special needs individuals and their families, and they've really showcased that here. So I thought they did a great job.
Great. This is Elise again, and I just wanted to share, I know I mentioned some additional social media examples, but these are some examples from brands that are both local and others that we've seen nationally that have really kind of put together some great social media posts and campaigns around COVID-19. The first one is an example on the left from Sprouts. And it's really, just a giveaway contest that encourages their followers to post positive photos and to tag Sprouts and share that with their family and friends using a specific hashtag. Again, there wasn't anything outside of that in terms of anything overly engaging. It really was just meant to serve as a positive outlet for their followers to engage with their community. The other thing on here is Real Good Foods. This is a delivery basket that essentially was asking their followers for help of, just wanting them to donate people that might be working on the front lines and wanting to ask them to send that information so that they could share care packages with them free of charge. That was just another really great way to both have engagement, but also share a lot of positivity and hopefulness without anything in return. The third one on here to the right is an example from Real Simple, from their Instagram account, and it really was just asking people to share how they're showing kindness to others by using the hashtag #BeTheKind. Again, this was a great way just to encourage overall hopefulness and positivity and engagement with their followers, but it wasn't overly promotional of themselves, and it was just really giving that message of hope. So that kind of goes through those three areas of posting things that are encouraging and engaging for your community, sharing positive and hopeful experiences on your social channels, and really serving as that resource hub for those that need to be taken care of right now and might need that kind of hopeful, positive message. As I shared before in those examples earlier, this is also a great way to kind of cross-promote other organizations that might also offer a resource to your audience and can be really helpful in that way. So these are just three really solid examples that I thought I would share that get that communication across.
And then this is Kate. I don't want to spend too much time on these because I know we're coming up on our hour here in a few minutes, but we included a few resources that we thought might be helpful to you. And as we mentioned before, we will share these slides with you afterwards. So don't feel like you have to scribble these down quickly, but Bloomerang is offering a library of free tools and resources that they've been updating in real time, and it's all free, even if you do not subscribe to them. So I would encourage checking that out. And then we've got a couple other resources here as well. Again, I don't want to go too deep into it. And Larry, I'll let you chime in if you want to. I know some of these are your tools too, but these are all great ones that we found that are free and pretty comprehensive.
Sure. I want to reference a couple at the end here. The Nonprofit Quarterly article, it's a bit dated at this point, but there are some links in there to a lot of the resources that are available to you as nonprofit organizations as you're dealing with this time. So I would check that out. It's a really interesting article. A few others, I'm sure you all have heard of the Paycheck Protection Program for nonprofits. I thought this particular publication did a pretty good job of outlining the steps that you need to take, if you haven't already, to apply for the Paycheck Protection Program. So I'd check that out. And then if you are a Colorado-based organization, which I know a lot of you are, there is a Colorado COVID Relief Fund whereby Colorado-based community organizations can receive grants of up to $25,000 per organization, and the link to that site is there if you're not already familiar with it. And you know, that is a Colorado example, but I think a lot of communities that I've looked at around the country have similar programs, that it really varies. So I would encourage you to check out your local state and city government websites and for more information about local relief that may be available to you. And finally, thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And when Kate and Elise and I started talking about this several weeks ago, we all just, I think, had this sense that we wanted to just be helpful in this time. And I can't, you certainly don't want me providing medical care in a hospital, but this is the stuff that we know, and we felt like that hopefully we could provide a little value here, and we hope that you found it to be valuable. So please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. Again, we'll distribute the slides after this, and we have recorded this session. We'll be distributing that as well. But don't hesitate to reach out to any of us if you have further questions or want to dig deeper into something that you heard one of us say. We're here for you, and want to thank you all for the support that you provide to your respective communities and for all that you do. So thank you all very much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, guys. We appreciate it, and we appreciate everything that you are doing to support our communities.
Likewise. Thanks, everyone.